Hello, good evening, and or good afternoon, or good day to you, wherever you are in the world watching us on this episode of Old Romans Unscripted. Greetings to you, Brother Stanislaus.
Hello, Excellency. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Oh, good. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Now, today, of course, is an interesting day. Some of you may have noticed that the channel has officially moved over to a purple season. We are now, of course, in Jessima, at least in Europe we are, as of this evening. You over there in the States, today is the 6th Sunday of Epiphany anticipated, or indeed the 7 holy founders of the Servite order. Tomorrow, of course, then is, wherever we are in the world, Septuagesima Sunday. Septuagesima Sunday. Now, brownie points for anyone who in the comments can tell us what Septuagesima means. Septuagesima. That is the Sunday tomorrow. Jessima, of course, is the pre-season of Lent. So the indication is that we have 3 Sundays now before Lent, and Holy Mother Church desires that during this time we begin to prepare ourselves for our Lenten discipline. So it's time to think about what it is you're going to give up or take on for your Lenten discipline. Nearer the time, of course, we'll be discussing and sharing ideas about Lenten discipline. But meanwhile, there is lots to talk about. There's been lots in the news of late, not least of which were the shocking determinations from the deliberations in Germany. Today's episode, in fact, is entitled Synodality, deliberately in parenthesis, Synodality, because, of course, it's a made-up word, auf Deutsch. Synodality auf Deutsch. Synodality in German. What does it mean? Because it seems to mean heresy and apostasy. Shocking revelations this week from Germany. Greetings to Anne there from Ireland. Welcome. Hello, Janet in South Africa, of course. Peggy, well done. Hello, Peggy in East Tennessee. 70 days before Easter. Absolutely. Or 7 weeks till Easter. Shirley, welcome. Yes, indeed. So well done. Brownie points to you all. That's what Septuagesima means and what it signifies. Hello there to Raymond. Welcome. So, brother, the revelations from Germany. Last week, of course, we were asking the question, is Pope Francis a heretic because of his new slant or definition or interpretation of the communion of saints? Whereas I suppose the question this week might be, is the church in Germany in apostasy? And is it in open apostasy? Because the results this week of their deliberations were quite shocking. Let me just go through them and then we can discuss them perhaps in more detail. But the particular things that the Synod in Germany concluded upon: women's ordination. And here they're not just talking about deacons. And when they were talking about deacons, they were talking about transitional deacons, not permanent deacons, because they also discussed and have put forward a desire for the Synod on Synodality to address the ordination of women as priests. Second shocking revelation from Germany was more lay involvement in the discernment and appointment of diocesan bishops. Now, that actually, historically speaking, is not that big of a deal. In times past, laity were, of course, involved in the election of diocesan bishops, as were clergy. So that's not so shocking, but shocking in respect of the current centralized way of determining appointments. The third revelation from Germany this week was a desire for married clergy. They want a relaxation of celibacy, and they want even present clergy to be able to marry. In other words, priests who have technically already taken a vow of celibacy, the church in Germany want them to be able to marry should they want to. Next was a demand for the blessing of same-sex unions, together with, lastly, a redefinition doctrinally concerning homosexual acts to be unsinful. Wow. So there were other things, of course, that came out of their deliberations, but those are really the major key ones. And we're going to discuss something about those now. And just greet a few more people. Hello to Barbara. I wave to you across the valley. They're here in Brighton. Greetings to Deacon Philip in Macedonia. Greetings to you. I won't even attempt to pronounce your name, but good evening to you. Okay, so, and I've just seen appeared there is Bishop Kelly. So 1 second, let's bring Bishop Kelly on. Good. Hello, Bishop Kelly. Oh, we can't hear you.
Yeah. We see
Is
you,
it
but
plugged
can't
in
hear
properly? No.
you. I think
Try it
maybe that's-
without.
Something changed.
We've both got headphones on, so if you want to take yours out, see if that works. No. Okay, so Bishop Kelly may come back in a moment. We apologise for that, for those technical difficulties. Anyway, let's start the discussion. So, of the list, Brother Stanislaus, what immediately stood out to you?
To be honest, I can't say I was surprised at any of it, because any of us who have been watching what's been happening over in Germany for 20, 25, 30 years, at least publicly, we could have predicted this. You could have as well. You could have said, here's what their documents are going to say when they're done. And maybe we would have been surprised had they decided to be more Catholic, rather than what they're really saying is that we want to be more Protestant. We want to be publicly a Protestant church, but recognized as Catholic. And so when I hear the list, I kind of shrug my shoulders, thinking, okay, eventually, well, one, it's a list, but from what I understand going on in Germany, these things are already going on. It's not like they're going to be starting from scratch. There's already a movement going on. So I don't think that what the German church decides to do eventually, if they decide to do those things, I don't see how anybody can be surprised or even bothered really by it, because the German cardinals and priests and bishops have for decades now been systematically causing a schism there in Germany.
Well, I mean, I think you've hit one of the proverbial nails on the head there by referring to Protestantism, or I would say the analogy that leapt to my mind was Episcopalianism or Anglicanism. Yeah. Because, of course, I mean, this whole synodal path, this whole synod and synodalities, this whole concept of what a synod is and is about smacks of contemporary Anglicanism. And, of course, and we've seen the dangers that brings, which are mirrored exactly in these voted upon deliberations from the synodal way in Germany, because in the Church of England, for example, the ordination of women, that was debated in what they call General Synod, and a 2/3 majority was required to pass initially the ordination of women as deaconesses, then as deacons, then as priests, then as bishops. And of course, at the moment, the Church of England is deliberating on the blessing or marriage of same-gender unions. In the Episcopal Church in America, they of course are recognized as the leading progressives in Anglicanism. And what they have done, even though they have a similar governing structure, they call their higher body the General Convention rather than the General Synod. But even so, they have followed a continual praxis where rebels take action first and then General Convention rubber stamps it afterwards. So, for example, the ordination of women, initially General Convention said no. Various rebels ordained women as deacons and then as priests and eventually as bishops, despite the fact that General Convention said no. And then after they had done that, after they had consecrated a woman as bishop, Barbara Harris was the first woman bishop so-called consecrated by the Episcopalians in America. Then General Convention passed the motion and permitted the ordination of women. Same thing later happened. The blessing of same-gender unions within the Episcopal Church in America. Various rebels did it first, and of course, what's interesting is that they were never disciplined. So those bishops who ordained women as deacons and priests before it was permitted were never disciplined. The bishops who consecrated Barbara Harris as a bishop were never disciplined. Those priests and bishops who have blessed same-sex unions or pretended marriages, they have never been disciplined. And now General Convention, of course, has rubber-stamped that behavior So it all works the other way around. Now, of course, what will be interesting to see, and which apparently there are voices in Germany threatening this, that the German church will go the same way. Already last month in January, at the beginning of January, a protest was held by priests in Germany who blessed publicly same-gender unions, in defiance, of course, of the Church and the Vatican. And then subsequently now, the deliberations from this synodal way has voted a 2/3 majority for the introduction of such. And they want this, of course, to what these votings, these deliberations are about, is what they want the Synod of Synods or Synod of Synodality next year to discuss. It's quite it's quite worrying from respect of course, the unity of the church. And it's also, of course, worrying because it betrays the level of apostasy that has infiltrated the church in Germany. Bishop Kelly, I don't know if did you hear the 5 things? You can probably guess. They want the ordination of women. They want celibacy optional, blah, blah, blah.
Can you actually hear me now? Good.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. You probably heard my eye rolls. You know what? Well, it doesn't. I was going to say it puzzles me, and that's kind of I would say an English term that's very genteel. It doesn't puzzle me at all, actually. When I hear this term of synodality, well, it's grossly misused, and it's been misused by the Anglican Convention, and it's the Lutherans. I mean, it's no surprise whatsoever that this is happening in Germany. The author of confusion in Christendom, nobody ever looks to the fact that if there's, I mean, I'm not agreeing with it, but if synods are used well, nobody looks to the East. And one of their big things is that nobody can change orthodoxy. You can't introduce anything new with synods. Nobody seems to get this, and these are the people within Christendom that have used synods more than certainly the Latin Church, and nobody appeals to that. It's the zeitgeist, it's the popular appeal, and I think if the Latin Church goes down this road, which it's headed towards, I mean, this is the ruination of everything, which is precisely what they want. And I'm increasingly more convinced that this is exactly where certain people want the church to be. They wanted to go down this road to ruination. They wanted to go down this road to confusion. I mean, I'm not quite there where I would say it's the one world religion sort of thing, but God, I'm getting close. It's
well, I mean, of course,
it's confusing.
In Germany, in Berlin, they are building, or I think they have built, but they are building a one worship center, which somebody misinformed suggested that they were holding interfaith worship. They're not. The building is divided into different worship spaces for Christian, Muslim, and Judaism. But the point is they're all sharing one building. And of course, a similar building is being built in the Middle East.
That's the Abu Dhabi thing.
In Abu Dhabi. And there's the Accord, of course, that Francis signed. with the Grand Mufti or whatever he's called of
Yeah,
in the
where
Middle
he
East
said
there about
where he said God wills
all
all world
religions.
religions.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you know, I was once at an ecumenical service, and it was in a Christian church, not a Catholic church, but a Christian church. And they had this guy, it was here in the United States, an indigenous person who was smudging.
Oh, yeah.
So he's running around the church with sage or some sort of thing. Now, I may be completely wrong in this, and if somebody wants to write in and correct me, that's fine. You know, because I know little about it, but apparently smudging is to expel all evil spirits out of the church. You know? I mean, so what does that say? When a Christian church disposes of, I mean, I'm talking about a physical building, disposes itself to have some other religion come in to rid it of evil.
Well, you remember that just a few months ago there was a Catholic cathedral your side of the pond where an indigenous person performed a smudging ceremony before the entrance of the clergy and the bishop.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, that was Catholic. Well, you know, in inverted commas. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what does it say about where we're at and what we believe? You know, it's. I think this nonsense just has to stop, but it's not going to stop, and we're not going to stop it. It's going to continue. It's down a road to perdition, and people have to decide where they're going to hang their hats, because this is getting absolutely out of hand, and it's one of those things that I know it's a cliche, but it's in slow motion watching a car crash or a train wreck. I mean, what are you doing with the faith? It's the absolute apostasy, because you've been charged with something that's priceless, but yet you're running it into a brick wall, and I don't know what to say anymore. I mean, we've been on these shows months after months. I really don't know what to say. I mean, it's beyond scratching of the head. What are they doing? You know, it's.
Yeah.
And what annoys me about it, I mean, I honestly shouldn't care. To be honest, and if I was, I'm being very honest here. If I was stronger in my faith, I wouldn't care. And perhaps I don't, but when I see this happening, I just, I wonder what the future is, and I should be stronger in my faith to know what the future is. That truth will prevail in the end. And it will. I'm not saying I've lost my faith or anything, but when I see them playing with it, it just makes me. It shouldn't make me despair, but it does, and it's because it's the men in power that are doing it. But by God, they are just flushing it down the drain in front of our eyes, and it's upsetting to me, because it's the church I grew up in, and it's the Church of Christ that I'm still part of. And to see them do it with such bravado really annoys me. And it makes me sorrowful. I shouldn't be sorrowful. I should be a man of hope, because I'm a person who preaches hope. But by God, it just makes me so sad. It's day after day. There's something else that comes up, and I'm like, what are you doing? And I've thought about this recently, and it does make me sad. But when I think about what am I sad for, and the only conclusion I can come up with is I'm sad about the souls that are lost because they believe in this. And somebody said to a friend of mine recently, oh, I like Bishop Kelly very much, but he doesn't believe in our Pope, therefore he's not a Catholic. Well, first of all, I do believe in your Pope, and I believe he's horrible. But I'm not a sedevacantist or anything else. Why would you even say about that? Because you obviously haven't thought. I mean, you blindly believe this person, and he's the most destructive person. I can't think of anyone, and I've dabbled in history. I can't think of a pope that's been as destructive as Francis.
No.
I can't. I really can't.
Just to answer Raymond's question, is it sinful to go into a Novus Ordo church, I assume, just to pray a rosary for souls buried in a columbarium in a lower basilica and leave? No, it isn't. It isn't a sin to pray anywhere, because by virtue of praying, you sacralize that space. So by all means, and indeed, I would encourage people actually I wouldn't encourage people to go to the Novus Ordo Mass, but otherwise to visit the churches and to pray a rosary, to offer prayers of reparation, especially to the Blessed Sacrament. That would be wholly appropriate. But all I would say is as you leave, don't put money in the collection pot in the collection box. As we said last week, the one way that may make them sit up and take note is if they themselves become poor.
I would encourage Raymond, not just to pray in Novus Ordo churches, and I've stopped in the few that are still open, and especially the historic ones that still have various shrines and reliquaries there that you can, of course, pray in front of. But I've said in this program before, take your beads out and reclaim the public square. I don't often take public transport, but when I do, I often take my rosary beads out and say a rosary on public transport. And you should see the looks I get. But I don't know why it's particular. I'm obviously dressed as a priest. I have, collar on, and if I'm not in a cassock, I'm in a black suit with a Roman collar. Normally, that doesn't bat an eyelid, but when I bring out the beads and start praying, people are that. I'm just saying, people get upset, and I've had comments passed to me. I'm just saying. I'll leave that. Wow. You can make your own conclusions with that. I mean, I'm dressed as a clergyman, but when I bring the beads out and start saying the rosary, people lose it.
Wow. Incredible. But there is, you see, this dilemma, isn't there, for us, this dichotomy. On the one hand, it would be very easy for us, and particularly as Old Romans, or indeed other traditional Catholics, SSPXers or otherwise, just to say, well, we're outside of it in one respect, not our circus, not our show. But of course, ultimately we we don't desire the destruction of
No, we don't.
church.
We love Holy Mother Church, and that's that was my point about bringing up the lady who said, "Well, I don't believe in your Pope." I do believe in your Pope, and I do love Holy Mother Church. I think it's really misguided, and it's gone down a very bad rabbit hole. But I believe in it, and it will be restored. I've no, um, I'm under no illusion that would think otherwise, because it will be, in one way or another. And I'm not to say in which way that will happen, but yeah, I just hate. It's the self-hatred of Catholicism which annoys me, and I see the destruction against personal faith, and I guess that's what leads me to a little bit of despair, because there are souls that are led astray and lost because of it. But yeah, I mean, we all want to see Mother Church triumph, as it should and as it will. But by God, it's up against it.
So how do we think? What do we think faithful Catholics should do? I mean, should they participate in the synodal path? Should they fill in the online feedback forms or join in the local discussions held in parish churches across dioceses? Should they try and voice an opinion for tradition? Or do we are we too cynical and think that actually, well, that probably wouldn't do anything and would be a waste of time? Instead, they would be better distancing themselves from the whole thing and praying and attending traditional chapels and the traditional mass, and waiting for such time as things may improve, perhaps with a new pontiff, or wait for the current apparently more conservative generation of young clergy to begin to reach the higher echelons, which in about 20 or 30 years perhaps they will, and then begin to perhaps influence things and turn things more toward a traditional bent. Brother Stanislaus, what do you think?
Well, my thoughts always go to what is the old Roman purpose in all of this? Because if there's not a purpose for the old Romans in all of this, then we're just wasting time. We're just talking heads on the internet. What is our mission? What is our purpose? And it's not a challenge or anything. I want to look at every situation like that in Germany, or look at the American church, and I always think, okay, why am I an old Roman, and why is it important for me to participate in what's going on? So the first thing that comes to mind is your last question about what do traditional-minded Catholics do? How do they participate? And they're going to say, and I think that those who are attending regularly a traditional Latin Mass, but they, go to the Novus Ordo Church, they're going to say, that's exactly what we're doing. We're participating. We're going to fill out every survey that we can. We're going to do everything in public so that people see who we are. We're going to wear our veils. We're going to dress properly to Holy Mass. Okay, that's always their answer. And I have a problem with that, because it's a difficult situation to be in, because they do look at us and they'll say, well, you've already separated yourself from the pack. We believe that change will come from within. And to be honest with you, it really irks me when I read about so many what would be called faithful Catholics who are um, they like tradition, they like the traditional Latin Mass, but they defend the church. And in part of my reflections recently, I realized that there is no way to address this. Germany, everything we're talking about, what's going on here in the United States, there is no way to properly and truthfully, authentically fight and address this except from the outside. Because if you stay, meaning that that if we think of the church as a cathedral, they don't want us in there. They don't like us in there. They don't want us to pray in there. They don't want us to show our faces in there. So we have to say, okay, well, I'll go on the porch. I'll go outside by the stairs. You can't remove me from there. And now, see, in that scene, I didn't leave the church. I didn't reject the church. I want to be there, but I want to be there in the fullness of the truth that has been believed by everyone all the time, not just new things like what we're, even though it's old things, but the new, why do they want this newness? Why do they want this stamp of approval of the church? And where I think you both know where I'm going to go. I start thinking about, okay, if all this is happening, what's our responsibility? And Bishop Kelly kind of hit on it with, that the great sadness, because our central role is to cure animarum, the care of souls. That's our central role. And that doesn't just mean the souls that cross our path, because we can pray for, the souls of the whole world all the time if we desire to do that. And so I really think that at least part of our role as Old Romans is to preserve everything in the truth. That's always been the truth. And we have to be authentic and animated, in the sense that what I mean by animated is that we can't be afraid to put ourselves on the line, because it is going to come down to that. They're not going to destroy what we do. They can't, because it's the sacraments, it's the Holy Mass. They can't destroy it. And I know I've mentioned this before, but to me, there's something about it. It's impossible for them to destroy the proper liturgy as it has always been celebrated in the Roman Rite. And we have that, and we keep that, and we celebrate that, and we promulgate that. And that's just it, is that that has to be part of what we do, and because there's really no conversion, and Archbishop, you've said this several times, no one's joining the Old Romans. That's not what we do. It's presenting the authentic catechism as it is, and it's sort of a side note. These same groups will highlight, like recently, 2 Episcopalian bishops who recently became Roman Catholic. And I see it on Facebook, I see it on the feeds, and I don't, but I want to comment. They didn't change. They didn't change their beliefs at all. The reason why they joined is because they didn't have to change. The church is changing, the German church, the American church. I'm sure I read lots of things about what's going on in Ireland. There's a lot of things going on within the Irish church, and so it's all over the world. And so again, I look at it and go, I don't know. Because the words that we're using, apostasy, heresy, homosexuality, all these things that have already been foretold, that this is the world that we would see just before the second coming of our Lord. Because, like, as you said, Archbishop, that of course things will be made right. But as educated men, I put the question forth. Oh, yes, we all believe that. We all know that, because it is the one true church. things will be made right. Oh, how is it going to happen? What's going to be necessary for that to happen? And I'll answer first. I only think the only way it's going to happen is by our Lord returning. That's the only way that everything's going to be set right. There's not going to be, like my friends in the traditional movement within the Novus Ordo Church, that's what they'll say, is that we fight from within so that things will change eventually, because they will. And I'm here to tell them it's not changing. The Roman Catholic Church that's recognized as Roman Catholic Church is not going back. It's going to continue to move forward. Right off the cliff is where it's going to move, and everybody with it, unless they latch on to the true faith.
Yeah, and I think my answer, my initial response is until the Lord returns, is a kind of counter question, which is, will the Lord find faith when he returns? And that is what I think our mission is as Old Romans, as you say, is to maintain, preserve, and pass on the Catholic faith, the fullness, the wholeness, and the traditional, the perennial faith of the Church for succeeding generations. Now, that may, and generally in many ways, is simply by our presence. As you say, it's not necessarily that people people don't need to convert, as it were. If you're Catholic, if you've been baptized a Catholic, then you don't convert to become an Old Roman, of course. You may choose to attend an Old Roman chapel or mission in the same way as people attend SSPX chapels and masses, but one doesn't need to convert, except in the sense of, and I think this is key to our mission as Old Romans, is the encouragement and the enabling of souls to convert entirely themselves, their hearts, their minds, their lives to Christ, and to do so through receiving the faith as it has always been taught and believed everywhere and by all, and by the definite and assured means of grace through the reception of the sacraments, preserved and offered and administered and continued in their traditional forms, in the traditional rites and liturgies. And I think that sums up what our purpose as Old Romans is. And of course, there is similarity, of course, with those traditional Catholics within the Novus Ordo institution, and with other traditional Catholics who are outside or on the fringes, like ourselves, except to say that as Old Romans, we have always purposefully tried to present and to preserve that which has truly always been believed everywhere and by all of the Catholic faith. Meaning to say, or meaning to suggest, that of course we have no truck with any of the liturgical innovations of the 20th century whatsoever. But the reason for that is not because we don't believe, for example, that the liturgy can evolve. Obviously, over the centuries it has. The Tridentine Mass, evolved over time, the traditional Latin Mass, but we resist those particular changes introduced in the 20th century because they were ruptures rather than organic developments. They were ruptures with the perennial praxis of the past, and not just the praxis, the liturgical practice, but also the theological conveyance and continuance of the faith. Now, of course, the rupture is come to its manifestation entire in the Novus Ordo Missae and accompanying rites. But even from the beginning of the 20th century, long before everyone had even thought of a Second Vatican Council, the popes were tinkering with the liturgy in ways that they had never done before. And, in part, that reflected this new notion or introduced by papal infallibility, and this suggestion that the popes were above absolute reproach and could do anything they want, and anything they say must be regarded as divinely revealed, etc. Even though that is not what Pastor Aeternus suggests, but as John Cardinal Henry Newman said at the time, this is how people will interpret it, and of course they have. And which is why we have this ridiculous notion, as Bishop Kelly gave an example of papolatry today, where Catholics who otherwise probably don't believe in the Blessed Sacrament, who otherwise don't believe and don't follow the Church's ethical teaching on contraception and abortion, and sexual life generally, who otherwise are ignorant of the perennial tradition and magisterium of the Church, yet will say that they're Catholics because they believe, they stand with the Pope. But unfortunately, as has been demonstrated in recent decades, the popes are no longer custodians of tradition.
I will say one thing, but just in case that person I'm talking about she is very traditional in her beliefs, and she does not believe in contraception or any of those other things. But your point still stands. But I should highlight that.
Oh yeah, I mean, but
there are many other people, not her,
yeah,
who would believe that. Well, I'm a Pope's man to the boots, and but Biden, President Biden thinks he's a Pope's man.
Yeah,
and the Pope has courted him.
But ironically, so does Bishop Sanborn, and so do Sedevacantis and others. They will, even though they don't recognize the current Pope, nonetheless they are papalists in the sense of they hold to a shall we say a higher appreciation of Vatican I. I mean, and what's interesting is that
the whole thing is, like you raised a very good point, Archbishop, with the popes of the 20th century. I do not disagree with the fact. I don't think Pius X thought he was tinkering with the Catholic Church when he tried to reform the calendar. However, he comes out of a tradition that was spawned by Vatican I, and a mindset that actually would lead to greater consequences. I don't think he was a bad man at all.
He didn't just tinker with the calendar, though.
No, I know that, but that's what he's infamous for in tradi circles.
But what is key, though, I think, is the fact that he did fiddle with the breviary, and he fiddled with the breviary.
Well, I linked that with the calendar.
Sure, but in tinkering with the breviary, apparently, I mean, for appreciable intentions. So the idea was that the parochial clergy or the secular clergy particularly was saying this is very cumbersome. There's not enough hours in the day for us to recite the whole breviary and do everything else that we have to do, and so he changed the breviary. But in fact,
it was in a way. I mean, that was
it was in a way. But it didn't stop people like St. Francis de Sales. It didn't stop people like the Curé d'Ars. It didn't stop,
doesn't stop us.
No, and it doesn't stop us. So, but my point is, hold on one second, because my point is that tinkering began the alteration of priestly spirituality that led eventually to I'm not talking of that which Francis accuses traditionalists of, but rather that clericalism that Francis and Supich and Roche and all the rest of it betray and manifest themselves.
Yeah. And to be very Vatican II about it, it did tinker about the official liturgy of the church.
Yeah,
and that has to be borne in mind as well. Yeah, no, I do agree with you on it. But I don't.
Especially
when the breviary was malintent.
Especially when the breviary is the rock upon which the whole liturgy. You say you didn't. Lex orandi, lex credendi. You change the way we pray, then you start changing the way we believe, and then lex vivendi, the way we live. I mean, there are all sorts, finer historical points and all the rest of it. We could go into breviary reforms, but the principle is, that it wasn't until the 20th century that reforms to the breviary had happened before, but they had happened in a more organic way. That's the point. The whole traditional liturgy had organically developed. Little things were introduced, little things were changed, little things were dropped. But nobody had attempted prior to the 20th century liturgical reforms on the scale that Pius X onwards did. And that's in part because of the modern world, because communication's so much faster, because printing presses are so much quicker, so on and so forth. But it's the fact too, though, that the motivation behind it, though appreciable, as I say, wasn't quite right, was it? Because
and I agree with you there. And I think that's what I was saying. I don't think it was any sort of malintent on his point. But,
no, not deliberately, yeah.
But he bought into that. I mean, he's a product of what Pius IX had started. And, you could argue before that. But anyway, I'm not saying he was a bad guy. I don't think, he did very good things. The oath against modernism is a laudable thing in my mind. But to roll back on what you said earlier about and brother was saying there about the old Romans, I think in traditional Catholicism, I think because it's a knee-jerk reaction against Vatican II, the majority of it, and we don't have that baggage. If I can use that horrible term, and I think what we can bring to the table is it is nuanced in a way, but we don't have that Victorian reaction to human beings. Let me put it like that. I think we have our roots in a more medieval approach to our interaction with human beings, and I think there's a Victorian moralism that the reaction to Vatican II speaks through, which is not helpful to dialogue with the modern world. Do you understand what I'm saying there? I think we can speak to that in a much more nuanced and human way, which comes from a medieval approach. As a medievalist as I am,
we all are really.
I am.
Well, I am really.
Hands up.
But it is, as you say, though, it is that medievalist worldview
yes.
that speaks more to where we as Old Romans come from.
Yes.
And it is that more holistic
Yeah. And nothing
understanding and appreciation.
I mean, you will never sacrifice the core truths of Christ's teaching and the teaching of the gospel. But there's an approach to it, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, it seems to me that's exactly, because I agree with you. Of course, you can't disagree, really, if you know the Old Romans and what they are. You say, okay, well, yeah, that's true. That is what they are.
Brother, you were educated by the Dominicans, so yeah, you understand what I'm saying.
I do, but I think that's the first finger point that we'll get is they'll say, okay, you're living in the past. You're thinking like the past. You're thinking like,
but we're not.
The church has evolved and developed, and so has spirituality, so has thought. I mean, that's one of the, I'm reminded of it being also thrown at me in regards to spirituality. In that, well, you advise and live a spirituality that is old. That is, it's kind of like, fasting or on Fridays and abstaining from meat all year long. If you do it, and the thought became, and it's not that it's a wrong thought, but well, if you can't do that, do something else, give up something else, and see, once that kind of crept in, well, then. You're free to do whatever you want because no one's really going to come back and say, "Hey, where's your replacement observance?" So
everything becomes relative and subjectivist.
Yeah, except during Lent, because during Lent you will see the full gyms and people looking for fish and chips everywhere, or that kind of dinner. But it's Lent. And so, I mean, even the fast food companies recognize that they started having these specials on their fish products. So I just think that for me, as an Old Roman and as in my ministry and mission, that I see that people want to understand what's going on. They want to know what's happening. Why are these things happening?
Point. That's my point. My point is that people actually they don't want the easy way out. People don't actually want that. If you look at the explosion of particularly Russian Orthodoxy in the United States, with young men, they don't want an easy way out. They want a challenge in life. And as you mentioned in Lent, they want strict fasting. They want a challenge, and I think the medieval mindset doesn't bow to. Well, I'm just about to repeat myself. It doesn't bow to kowtowing, but it presents itself as, let me understand you where you're at. Let me impose upon you and dialogue with you in an intellectual rigorism, and we're not saying that rules are just rules because they are. Rules have developed because of an intellectual rigorism that we have discerned as a Christian society as why they're there. And I think we can challenge people with that. We can meet them with that. I meet as a chaplain. I meet people on a really airy-fairy sort of level. I'm just there as the smiling face. But when you actually get down to dialogue, they want something more. And when you start, God, I'm using cliche after cliche today, but when you start dialing down, they appreciate the dialogue. They appreciate the challenge, which medieval thought gives them more than Victorian moralism. And I think we can actually challenge modern day societies like modern day mores or morality, like transgenderism and all of that. I honestly believe, rather than a Victorian moralism, I think medieval thought can really challenge that in a more profound way.
Yeah. And also because it's
true.
Because it's true. I mean, that,
but
because it
engages
works.
Gets to
because
its
it
point.
works.
Yeah.
Because the disciplines and the practices and everything that developed by the time of the medieval period and through, people adopted them and used them because they worked. The reason why so much was written about them, the reason why there were so many profound teachers in the spiritual and mystical life at that time, is because these things worked, and because they objectively worked. Didn't matter where you were from, didn't matter what your race or creed or anything else was. If you started to live your life according to these Christian principles and ways and religious and devotional pietistic practices, then you would objectively become holy. You would objectively become sanctified. You would objectively convert from sinner to saint.
It's faith and reason again. If you can convince somebody by thought through faith, and I definitely wouldn't leave that out of it, rather than imposing a law upon them. I mean, you have it's the old adage, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man how to fish, and he eats for life, sort of thing. It's convince the person of the object reality, and that's not easy these days because everything is so subject to people. But
also is that modern fallacy, though, isn't there, that somehow we are more today than ever we were before, that somehow we have evolved into something, and yet the truth is, when you study history, and that's why that maxim, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. When you look at history, when we study history, all of the stuff that goes on today, all the attitudes prevalent in the zeitgeist today have always been there, and they have always manifested themselves at particular times of when things were going well. So if we look at the height of the Roman Empire, all these types of issues that we're talking about today, even read the nature of human relationships and marriage and unions and so on and so forth, was all discussed in those days. And which is why, in some respects, that's why some people today use a kind of faux archaeologicalism to justify things today, because they say, oh, well, look, the Romans were doing it. And yet, what happened to the Roman Empire? It all fell apart. It collapsed. And voices before and during its collapse were pointing out, actually, guys, it's this immorality, it's this subjectivism, it's this personalism that is destroying the fabric of society, because we are losing that perception, understanding of ourselves in true and objective relation to each other, rather than just the subjective.
I'm, as you probably well know, and I'm always cautious about talking about these things on a platform like this, but I am a hospital chaplain, so everyone knows that, and I do work with do a lot of work with the mentally ill, and I have a lot of these conversations with people, and a lot of this stuff has led people to suicidal ideation, but what I've learned over the years is that when you have an object conversation with them, it frees them from the subjectivism that they're trapped in. And if society as a whole could actually grasp that, it would change things ultimately. And I mean, I've become more and more convinced of it the more I talk to people on just a one-on-one level. Because a lot of the suicidal ideation is subjective. Once you sort of open up the possibility of objective truths and a worldview, I'm not saying it's the answer for everybody, but I've never sensed a non-freeing feeling when that conversation happens. And I think society needs a damn good dose of that.
Well, what I hear you saying, and I think that's also been my experience, is that people want to hear the truth.
Yeah.
And most people are pretty good truth understanders. When they hear the truth, they know it. And it's been my experience because I'll see addicts and homeless and things like that, and talking with them, they want the truth, no matter what it is. But the truth makes people angry because it's against what the Archbishop was already saying, that that may be true for you, but for me, this is my truth. And somehow I think that things like messing with the breviary, it began that. I think you can link a response like that's your truth, not my truth, to tinkering with things that should not have been tinkered with. And when that started with Pius X, at least when he did that, we know 100 years before, there were people within the church, men within the church, already trying to change things, to become more modern with the world, to get more acceptance. Because for me, when I hear that, is that that's adulation. They want to be recognized for who they are and what they're doing, which is a form of clericalism. And so for me, as an old Roman, and in this medieval, because I like that observation that it's really a medieval way of thinking, of learning, of understanding, of even interacting. Now, the modern people don't understand it.
It's actually it's pre-Christianity. It's actually Greek. I mean,
Hellenistic. Yeah. It's and so I that's just, you're right. I get all that. I'm shaking my head, going, yeah, that I agree. I know exactly what you mean.
I only highlight for our viewers. I know you get it.
And so I still though think, okay, it makes sense because our mission, my mission. I go about what I go about every day. And if someone wants to come and take part, they're not going to see anything different, And so to me, that's mission. That is en missio, that's really witnessing to the world. And of course, in Holy Mass, if it's done with the right intention, you can bring the whole world in on it. So their mission is so central to who we are, but a lot of it's invisible. And one of the when I had my novices, one of the books I required them to read, and then we would have a discussion about it, was Soul of the Apostolate. And I realized more and more that Soul of the Apostolate talked more about internal things. How are you living spiritually? How are you living out your life? Because that is going to be what touches people. And that's where I think the difference is that now in the modern Catholic Church, seminarians, religious priests, women in religious life, they're all taught about, okay, what are you going to do? Our mission is this, rather than how are you going to change? How are you going to become more like God, more perfect? And that's no longer taught now, because it's the same thing. It's everybody can be everything if they want to be, and their truth is, you have to respect their truth. We're watching this right now live, going on in Canada of all places. And then here, we have this bridge in Detroit, the one they've been talking about that they've been blocking, and then I hear in France and, they're doing something. What is this? Because that's what I think. I say, okay, what is going on? Because it's happening all over the world. And is there an association spiritually with what the church is and what the church, because for me, what the church is us. That's what the church is. It's what's always been. It's complete, fully, wholly there. Okay. The modern church, however, what is their role in what's going on? And we keep saying it. Well, they're leading people down a path that is not going to end in a good place, and that's part of the truth. I'm not saying that we should go knocking on doors and saying, hey, if you're going to the local Catholic Church, you're going to go to hell. That's not what I'm saying. But the truth is that if someone is attached to the modern ways of the modern Roman Catholic Church, they're in trouble.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you said, the difference primarily between the perennial church and the contemporary is that the traditional church is about conversion and is about the offering and oblation of oneself to God, and it's about sacrificing oneself and everything to and for God, whereas the contemporary church is all about fitting oneself to the modern world. It's all about changing to conform oneself to the modern world.
It's sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. And you have to remember that. And you mentioned something earlier in what you were saying, whether it was, I had to give a sermon recently at the hospital on this, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, I had no idea that that's what Christianity was about. And I basically said that Christianity was a cosmological experience. It's God interacting with his creation in the most intimate way. And that's just not Mother Earth. That's with the entire universe.
Well, see, I would go further and I would say it's metaphysical.
But of course yes. And I think I did mention that in the sermon. Anyway, that's not what she asked me about. Well, of course it is. I mean, the whole thing is about, and it's all summed up in the heightened summit of our faith, which is the Holy Mass. I mean, where God is made present, where the veil is pulled aside between heaven and earth. And we eat of his flesh and drink of his blood, etc. I mean, you can't get higher than that, and that's where the danger is when the modern church is mucking with it. That's not a good thing, and that's the summit of where we encounter Christ, and he said it himself. Unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, to the Greeks it was cannibalism. To the Romans as well, the early Christians were accused of cannibalism because they talked about eating of the flesh of Christ. When you think about it, I mean, to us now it seems like a Bible passage, but that's pretty radical when it comes to our religion.
If you believe, that's just it. That's what I believe is that most. Well, we know most don't believe.
Right.
If in the fact when our as Excellency, when our Lord said that, many left him. Most left him. They couldn't take it, and I know we've all experienced that in our own ministries that. When you get down to it, because dialogue is okay. I know you have to have dialogue. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to respond to what are, probably very good questions, very good points. However, there is the truth in the end. There is the truth. And I'm going to express that to you. And it may contrast to how you're living your life, to how you're believing your life. It's like right now, I've been reflecting, as we all have, of what's going on in the world. But, we began today talking about the German church and synodality and what they're doing. And I couldn't help but think about, well, look at what's going on here, that people are rising up against the mandates. They're saying again, my body, my choice. What happened? I thought that was a freedom that everyone was afforded. My body, my choice. Okay, and then you see the talks of openness, dialogue, synodality in the Roman Catholic Church, the true Church of God. Okay, to me, there's a Trojan horse in both scenes, that the mandates are going to stop. That's because we all know, we're watching the world, we're watching country by country every day. Another country stopped everything. Okay, it's eventually going to happen here as well. But they're going to keep the movement. So they're not going to turn back to like us, medievalists, as though we are, and say, well, what is truth? They're going to say, we have truth. It's our truth.
It's our truth.
And so the church will reflect that. I mean, you can look at all these, especially the bishops who have outlawed the Latin Mass. Their reaction to what's going on in these people coming together against the mandates, they all don't like it. They think that people, they want the people arrested. They want them out of there. And so once I look at that, I continue to say, we should be preparing. We should always be preparing, of course, and that's part of the old catechism as well. As that you have to prepare for your death. You should always be praying for a holy death. But who's reminding people of that?
No,
who's hearing that?
It's a shocking statement to tell a modern Catholic that you should pray for a holy death.
Well, it's shocking. It's shocking to tell people, to remind people that if you die in mortal sin,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It is shocking to people.
They'll say, "How dare you? How dare you say that? Because I'm a good person. Right. I do good things.
I do good.
My God would never ever treat someone like that. And if that's who your God is, well, then I don't want to have anything to do with that, because you're wrong. You're crazy, schismatics, as we're called.
You remind me of it's often told in the sort of post-Vatican II church that what's the difference between a liturgist and a terrorist? And you can always negotiate with a terrorist. My further comment on that is, show me a liberal and I can actually talk to them. Because most people who profess to be liberals are not, because they won't tolerate any other opinion other than their own. And it's an look. Whatever people label me, and I've been labeled many things over the years, but I'll always listen to your argument because I'm a medievalist.
Yeah, it's true.
It's true, though. It's true. I will always listen to your argument. I don't have to agree with it.
I think like both of you.
If you convince me, well, I'm paid up then. But make your argument. But you never get that. There's no dialogue anymore. It's just my way or the highway sort of thing, and it's the basest form of, honestly, human intellectual thought. And I hate to say that, but it really is base, because nobody's listening. And as you said many times, my truth. I mean, I said this during the week on the mental health unit at work. And, they were talking about, what they've been through and, various just life stories and all of that. But somebody mentioned my truth, and I said, well, do you actually believe that? Is there like an object? What is really true, or is it just your truth? I've never seen so many nodding heads in the room when I explained it. They're like, yeah, this is nonsense. This my truth, yeah, it's your experience of truth, or it may be, your interaction of your life story, all of that. That's a valid thing that needs to be said, but it's not truth, And to pose it as truth is kind of a mockery. Every head was nodding yes.
Well,
Because
we've
they
seen
want the
what.
truth.
But that brings me back
Well,
to my point. Once you open that dialogue and you explain to people are hungry for the actual truth, and they will accept it. They'll think their way through it. They don't have to. Yeah.
and they'll come to realize that there is an objective truth,
yeah.
just like there is an objective good. The trouble with subjective truth is that it invariably doesn't lead to objective good. That's when the gender ideology and all this stuff. It doesn't lead. The subjective truth doesn't lead to ultimate goodness. Invariably, it leads to death, but certainly it leads to nihilism, depression, anxiety, etc., and so forth. It's not objectively good.
And that's why I'm very reluctant to condemn any of it, because, not ultimately, but the whole transgender, people trying to look for themselves, and it's not their fault. It's the fault of society that's told them that your truth's as good as my truth, and everyone's so bloody confused that they don't know what they're at. And I don't agree with it, but I'm willing to talk to somebody about it and to just to have a genuine, frank, raw conversation. But I think that it's a product of the modern zeitgeist that people are so bloody confused. And it's very it's very sad to see so many. And I live in a part of the city here, with a university college. So many lost souls. It's just trying to find themselves, and there's no harm in trying to find yourself. But God, you've so many. You do. Sorry, let me rephrase that. You've so less tools to try and find yourself than we once did as a society, and it's very sad. And all they are, all they're doing is trying to find themselves. And
that's just is that I think you hit it. The tools, and we've talked about this last week as well.
Yeah.
Is that, and I've seen it in a couple of stories this week, but about a well-formed conscience. And what is a well-formed conscience? Well, it's not a conscience that has been formed by my experience. That's not what a well-formed conscience is. But people think that's what it is. That I've experienced my life, I've embraced my life, I've embraced who I am. That's why they go to find themselves. When it used to be not too long ago that your well-formed conscience was developed within the catechism of the church. And that's what gave you strength. That's what gave you stability. You knew who you were. Why did God make you? You knew who you were. And so men, and see, this is what the modern world rejects. I know you know this, but men, when they got to dating age, what were they doing? They were dating to find a wife. They were looking for not to go and have fun and go to college and just experience life and find yourself. And see, but that's just it. As I go back to it, who is saying this? because it's true. How are these kids hearing this? Are they hearing this? And of course, Bishop Kelly, you already said they're not, because there's no one out there, and we're only one person. But that, to me, that's what part of being an old Roman is that it's like, I think I told a story about the young man I met on the train, a student, and he was amazed at me. I'm in awe of me. I was just sitting there next to him. That's all. But once we began talking, and he was an intelligent kid, and he wasn't Catholic, but he asked a lot of the questions that had he lived in a medieval time, or even in the time when the church was still what it truly is. He wouldn't have those questions.
Yeah.
They would have been answered for him already.
I know we're up against time, but I would sort of posit this as sort of my own sort of final comment. But that experience you have, I've had a number of times. Young people are not stupid, and they're hungry for the actual truth, and they really are. And I use the word hungry because they want to talk. When they see you in a collar or a cassock, and they want to ask, why have you done that? And it can happen on the train. It can happen standing waiting for a bus or at the supermarket, because they still, and I think there's a little part of Western culture that still survives, despite the noise of the liberal world that tells you that you have to look as sexy as the ad in the magazine, or whatever it happens to be. There's a certain amount of stuff there, and it that will engage these people to ask, why have you chosen this? Because they want to know. And it all boils down to the very fact that everyone is on a search. I mean, you can go back to Socrates for that, and before. But they want to know. And I don't think it's not a hopeless world yet. I'll shut up now.
Well, we'll all shut up now, because I think we've gone on long enough. Now there are just a couple of notices I want to share. Just getting my notes up here. Some prayer requests of your charity. If you could offer a prayer for Father Tom. Father Thomas Gerke, it's his birthday today, so please say a prayer for him. If you could pray for the Brighton Oratory, because we're currently homeless, not through any fault of our own, but just through a set of unfortunate circumstances. So please pray for us as we try to find a new home. There are a few irons in the fire, but some prayers will be good. Please pray for the minor seminarians of the minor seminary in Burkina Faso that was attacked by Islamic jihadists yesterday. Nobody was killed, thank God, but the minor seminary is in a pretty bad state. So please pray for them and for their safety. Please pray for Father Davide Pagliarini, who is the Superior General of the SSPX, who has been received in audience with Pope Francis. Now, who knows what might come out of that? And lastly, please pray for Subdeacon Adam Sikora in Slovakia, who is both preparing for his diaconal ordination in Embertide this coming Lent, but who, and with his mother, Jana, are both suffering with COVID at the moment. So please pray for Subdeacon Adam and for his mother, Jana, who are both ill with COVID. Otherwise, to say that Catechism 101 will begin in March. I know I said it will begin in February, but just again through an unfortunate set of circumstances, just hasn't been possible. So Catechism 101 will begin in March, and Domestic Church will return as well. Some of you will have already noticed that the Rosary slightly changed format, a bit of a rejuvenation there, and there are some other programs in the offing. I know Brother Stanislaus had some ideas as well. So keep watching this space. Thank you and bless you always, all of you, for watching and for generally supporting us. Don't forget to like and share. People can find us on any of those platforms. Bishop Kelly, would you be so kind as to impart a blessing upon us all?
Well, yes, I'd be very happy to. And I just want to remember all of our viewers to remain hopeful and be happy. And God love you all. The Lord be with you.
Your spirit.
And with thy spirit.
May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost descend upon you and be amongst you forever. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from them.
Goodbye and God bless. We'll see you next week.
Bye for now.